Good afternoon, everybody. Today is Thursday, September 16th, and I'd like to welcome you to this week's installment of C-Suite Snacks. I'm Steve Ronan, the leader of Citrin Cooperman's consulting and outsourcing practices and the host of today's webinar. So many industries have changed over the past year and a half that it's difficult to pick which environment has shifted the most. But one of the top sectors in that conversation is certainly manufacturing and distribution. From supply chains to staffing, financing to shifting demand patterns with their customers, the conditions that both domestic and global M&D companies have faced and are still grappling with are like none other in our recent history. Citrin Cooperman's 2021 Manufacturing and Distribution Survey reflects how industry leaders and influencers are dealing with these conditions and what the hotspots are likely to be in the coming months and into 2022. Today, we're joined by Mark Fagan, co-leader of Citrin Cooperman's manufacturing and distribution industry and the global leader for M&D for More Global, to talk about our study and review some of the industry's trends we're seeing. As always, we ask you to submit questions throughout the webinar, so please locate the Q&A button on your Zoom screen and feel free to enter questions as we go. We may answer some of those during the course of today's discussion, and we will save time at the end to answer the rest. We'll also be doing our weekly snack basket giveaway, where one lucky attendee from today's session will win a craft, carefully curated basket of snacks. The winner will be announced at the end of today's session. Finally, if you're here because you found it on our website, social media, or had it emailed to you from a friend, I encourage you to sign up for a mailing list to make sure you receive an invite for our new snack size topics each week. Also, please visit the C-Suite Snacks Content Hub for the deck from today's session, the recording from today's session, and the details of the survey that we'll be talking through, as well as to review decks of prior presentations. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mark Fagan to today's discussion and hand it over to him to kick us off. Mark, over to you.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks again for having me, and really pleasure to talk about our survey. This we called our survey A Year Like No Other because that's pretty obvious. This was the second year we've done an M&D survey. So what we're going to do today is talk about some of the highlights of it. It's a very extensive survey, and really encourage you to look at and download the entire thing. So it was certainly a year like no other. This is me, Mark Fagan, and been doing this for a long time. And M&D is really a big focus of my practice. So just a little bit about the survey. It's the survey was conducted partnering with Fin Partners, and it was done between March 20th and April 14th of this year, 2021. As I said, we had done our first one in June of 2020, which was about a quarter into the pandemic. So there were some interesting differences between the first survey and this second survey that we're going to talk about today. It was focused on 200 manufacturing and distribution companies, and we were targeting owners, CEOs, senior VPs of operations to answer the questions. There were about 30 questions with a range of topics, which several of them we'll go over today. And the companies were anywhere from 10 million in revenues to some over $1 billion in revenues. So it was a good cross section, and they had operations in the US, headquartered in the US, but they also had global operations. Over 50% had operations across the globe. So it was a very good cut of companies, small and large. These are some of the top findings. Again, we're going to go over them in a little bit more detail in a few minutes, but new product and new service offerings was definitely something that we saw significant amount of our respondents had to adopt to and deal with and make a switch because of the pandemic. As Steve mentioned in the introduction, supply chain disruption was a big problem during 2020 for M&D companies. And it continues to be, and is going to be in the future. And such an impact that many of them are changing their sourcing options, and we'll talk about that. And the other is, something that we've seen in Industrial Revolution 4.0 that's been going on for several years with the M&D industry, the shift of e-commerce. COVID was really a catalyst to force companies to increase their online selling, increase their online communication with customers. And it really was a significant change from our survey last year in 2020. So those were the three top, but we're also going to talk a little bit about data analytics and what companies are doing to really understand how they make money. So let's start with financial performance. On an overall basis, M&D companies fared pretty well with the pandemic. Obviously, it depended on who the ultimate consumer was, but our survey respondents reported 46% had either modest or significant revenue growth in 2020, 20% flat, and this 34% statistic, it's really split in half. About 17% had modest decline, and another 17 or 18% had significant decline in revenue. And again, it really depends on who the ultimate customer was. And it also depended on a few other things. It depended on how quickly a company could adapt to the change. How robust was their website and their ability to communicate with their customers, and how flexible was their distribution channels. Those were all very important as far as if you're going to introduce a new product, to be able to communicate that to your customers quickly so that they could take advantage. For instance, masks. We had, this wasn't a respondent to the survey, but I had a client that went and started selling masks, and they had the right distribution channel. They were already into Home Depot. So they flipped their product from an existing product to a mask product, and their revenues tripled. Almost all of that was because of selling the masks. So there's a lot of different reasons behind the numbers, and the survey really digs into that deep in its 40-something pages. So again, a little bit more on product performance. And the question was, did you introduce a new product line or service during COVID? And then the follow-up question was, do you intend to continue the new product line after, post-COVID, whenever that happens, which we're, obviously still trying to figure out. So here you see a massive 66% of the respondents introduce new products or services, and the majority of them, 93%, are going to continue to with those products and services beyond COVID. And so, a lot of this is selling to different customers, more products being offered online versus walk-in. And obviously, the other example of selling masks when before you didn't have to. But the direct to consumer delivery really affected a lot of our clients. And I can tell you personally that food distribution clients that were maybe selling to schools, selling to other places that shut down, had to pivot and go into, some of them went into selling to from restaurants to shopping centers, selling directly to home delivery. So there was a lot of pivoting going on, during COVID. So product performance, again, M&D did pretty well from a revenue perspective, but they also were introducing different types of products. So here we talk a little bit about e-commerce and what we call the Amazon effect of using partners as a distribution channel. The e-commerce exploded, sales through e-commerce exploded in this survey as compared to the one that we did in 2020. So it's interesting, you see the question, current percentage of online sales. 46% of the respondents have between 51 and 75% of their sales being online. Now remember, these are manufacturers and distributors, which you wouldn't think that they would have that type of concentration in online sales. And again, last year in our survey, it was more in the 20 to 50% of sales being done online. Most of our respondents were in that range. And then the other, and this jumped again from our 2019 survey, 69% are using Amazon. All right, so again, Amazon is a partner that is here to stay, and we see that a lot of our M&D clients are making choices as to what products they're partnering with Amazon. So those are two very telling statistics about e-commerce. And with e-commerce and this kind of concentration, it opens up to a whole nother set of problems and risks for companies, and not just opportunities. It's the higher volume that's through the internet, the higher volume that is maybe has sales tax exposure, has cyber risk exposure, and the compliance with the e-commerce world. So we're talking to our clients a lot about that and how they're moving into this more digital world, what kind of skills they need, and to combat those business risks. So then we're going to switch to supply chain and talk about that a little bit. So the question in our survey, how has disruption to global supply chain caused you to significantly change how your product is sourced? And this was very telling that 66% of those surveyed have changed how their product is sourced. Now, what does that mean? And why is that? So let's talk about why that is. One of the things, everyone is dealing with it right now, and they're probably going to deal with it for at least the next year, is getting product to the customer is harder and more expensive. For instance, the cost of a container going from Beijing to New Jersey went from $2,500 per container to $7,500 per container, almost overnight at the beginning of COVID. But in addition to that, the time to market to book that container went from around 10 days to well over 20 days. And that was back when the survey was being done, and now it's even longer. So the cost to get the product in is more difficult if you're just single sourcing out of China, and it's also costing you a lot more money. So what are people doing? They are looking to not only get product from China, but possibly getting product from Vietnam, from South America, and possibly even doing it from the United States. Now, what does that do? That causes a lot of complications, because now you've got to set up multiple procurement sources, and that brings in other types of risks and complications, whether it be dealing with multiple currencies, dealing with regulatory environments in different countries, quality problems, source of raw materials. So changing how your product is sourced is a really significant risk as well as trying to minimize your concentration. So we see a lot of clients dealing with this right now and are going to continue to do it, into the future. I've got a client right now that is partnering with their manufacturer in China to build another manufacturing plant in, looks like, Texas. So again, it's going to be significant CapEx investment, but it's going to be worth it, because not only do you have the issues with supply chain, you also have the issues with tariffs and political instability. So supply chain is top of mind for every really for every M&D operator that I've been speaking with. ERP and data analytics. I think I skipped a slide. Just let me go back. Yeah. So let's talk about ERP and data analytics. We asked our respondents, how are they currently using data analytics? And as you see here in the results, it's kind of not a big jump between these different categories, but to better understand the buyer's behavior, timing of product delivery, and to understand where their customers are geographically and how much they're concentrating in different geographies across the country and across the world. And also as far as what key performance indicators are important to them. Kind of the typical quality control, material costing, and customer complaints, those were the highest. Now, this was kind of an interesting slide, but I think there's some complexities and underlying issues when you talk to customers, you talk to M&D companies about data analytics, because there's a lot that's not known and understood about data analytics by the CEOs of your, let's call it, middle market clients. And that's where I'm going to jump to the next slide. So here we ask the question, does your ERP system give you monthly profitability at the product level? Now, while 86% said yes, and if you look to the box to the right, that percentage goes down in the $100 million to $250 million range. We're not quite sure if they understand the question, meaning that we don't mean just gross profit by product and the direct expenses, but do they really understand how overhead is allocated to each of their products? And what we're getting at is there's a lot, most of the time, most M&D companies are profitable with about less than 40% of their products. If you really do a full absorption by product of overhead, management's time, R&D's time, and I think that's still, there's a lot to do in the middle market world, because they just don't have the systems that are sophisticated enough, and not only the systems, but also the talent in-house to have data analytics people really understanding their product profitability, like a Procter & Gamble does, a Johnson & Johnson does. Obviously, those are billion-dollar companies, and you're not going to have a $300 or a $500 million M&D company doing the same thing that they do. But we feel there's a lot more that can be done using data analytics and product profitability in this sector. So this is something that I know, Steve, that you work on with your clients, and there's a lot of room for improvement there. So, and this is something that I didn't mention in the beginning, but exit plans has been important for for our surveys, both last year and this year. And what we found in the 2020 survey, I'm sorry, in the survey for this year in 21, you've got 42% of respondents surveyed are thinking about selling their company in the next 3 years. So as many of you know, private equity continues to have a tremendous amount of dry powder and is out there buying companies at a feverish pace. But they're frankly very good at buying companies. And what many that have gone through the process have found is it's not an easy process. And the private equity companies, their job is to buy a company at X and sell it at X plus a factor. So while the business owner is looking to get the most out they can, the private equity company or the strategic wants to get a good buy. But it's a very effective way for business owners to be taking money off the table, but also to continue the business as a minority shareholder. So again, a lot of M&D companies are up for sale or thinking to be up for sale, and it creates a whole bunch of different complexities in getting maximum sales price. And that kind of is in our next slide that talks about what the respondents think is important for them to improve their company to maximize the company's value. So the question is, which things do you need to work on to get your company in the most valuable shape? And organizational structure and operations were the two top at 53 and 52%. And this is something that we see a lot of. We help companies go from being very reliant on a few different people to have a truly sustainable company where it's not, the value doesn't just sit with the CEO or a few people, that they've got policies, procedures, commission plans in place, sales plans in place. They understand product profitability. They analyze it. They have a culture of accountability. That all makes a company maximize its value. So, you can see here in the survey that a lot of them think that they've got to, if they're able to improve in these areas, that they can get more for the company. And this box on the right is kind of an indication of the different ways that the respondents are selling their business, whether it be handing it off to family members, ESOP plans, if you've got the right management in place, or like we said, selling to a strategic buyer in the same industry, maybe a competitor, selling to private equity, or possibly going public. And then we asked our respondents about tomorrow's growth and where they see the keys to future growth. Not surprisingly, it's around technology. So e-commerce was the first most important thing to their future growth, and technology a close second. And what's interesting about this is they also find that some of the biggest hurdles to future growth is the technology requirement. So whereas it's the most important, it's also one of the biggest hurdles. And it kind of makes sense because, again, especially for this group that we were surveying, they're not Procter and Gamble, and they're not these large companies that can throw 300 million into an ERP system or have teams of data analytic talent. They've got to do it, and they've got to do it on a much lower budget, and they can't afford to make mistakes in implementation or in software. So battling with the Amazons, the and everything that makes the customer experience different, and customer experience is really important to keeping those customers. That's all around technology, and that's something that the survey has said, and talking to our clients and industry experts, is tough in that middle market, because it's they just don't have that extra type of capital sitting around to invest in what's being required in best in class technology.
Mark, thanks a lot. This survey is something that you guys put out every year. I think it's a great piece of content. And I would say the last 2 years have been particularly interesting to see what's shifted. Question on the something that isn't in the survey and you didn't talk about, but I think we get a lot of questions on in this sector, which is staffing and finding the right people to get the company to run. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on with talent acquisition and what's likely to continue into next year?
Yeah, it's amazing. We had a discussion yesterday with a food distributor, and he said, Mark, I said, what about new customers? How you doing? Do you have any new customers? He says, I could get new customers right now, snap my finger. The problem is I don't have the people to work in the warehouse or the truck drivers to deliver it to that customer. And so that is what we're finding in every different subsector of M&D. Is it's not only lack of it's really lack of blue collar talent. And a lot of that during the pandemic was, well, okay, there's a lot of subsidies, government subsidies that people are frankly being paid to stay home. Those subsidies have now run out, but they still haven't seen an uptick in getting people back to work. And one of what we were talking about yesterday was Amazon has taken the if there was 1 million truck drivers on the road, now there's 1,500,000 truck drivers on the road. So you can't get truck drivers because there's just not a big enough pool, because everybody now is getting things brought to them versus going to the store. So across the board, it is, and it's not only warehouse, and it is also in the professional field as well. And they're giving full medical, they're giving very high starting salaries, and they're still struggling to fill that void.
Yeah, I think that's definitely consistent with what I'm seeing as well, Mark. And I think globally, some of the things we've been talking to our global partners about have been interesting. There seems to be an increase in joint venture types of capital investments in the middle market to try to share resources more effectively. 3PLs have definitely picked up the use of 3PL. Skilled labor internally, I think, continues to be a struggle as well. So definitely agree with that. Mark, any parting words for our audience before we close it out today?
I think what we're finding is that the companies that do well are the ones that are communicating across up and down their vertical stream of talent, and making change quickly. And I think they continue to have to pivot with supply chain and labor, different ideas, but that's it. I mean, it's last year was survival. Last year was, the decisions were almost easier last year because it was right in front of you. Now it's more mentally challenging because what's going to happen over the next 2 to 3 years, those aren't as easy questions to answer as all of a sudden last year was, my sales dropped 25%. What do I do? This now is more subtle, and I think it's going to be some harder decisions to make going forward.
Great. Well, Mark, thanks very much. Really appreciate you joining us today. I would encourage everybody on the phone to check out the latest manufacturing and distribution survey that's on the Citrin Cooperman website. We will also make sure to post a full link to that report on the C-Suite Snacks Hub as well. Today, the first snack basket giveaway of fall. Very excited, drum roll, and that is going to go to Glenn Levitan at Over and Back. Glenn, congratulations. Somebody from our marketing team will reach out to get your shipping info. Great to kick off with another giveaway and get back into that cadence. We will be ramping up the frequency of these C-Suite Snacks sessions throughout the fall. So please keep an eye on your emails for the invites and topics for upcoming weeks. You can also visit our C-Suite Snacks Hub for copies of today's presentation, a recording of today, as I mentioned, a link to the survey, as well as recordings and decks from prior presentations. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Join our mailing list, visit our website, and we look forward to seeing you on future C-Suite Snacks sessions. Have a great rest of your Thursday, great rest of your week, and a wonderful weekend. We look forward to seeing everybody soon.